Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly fascinating, a concept that completely bridges the gap between our deep psychological roots, specifically through the lens of astrology, and how those roots actually shape our real-world tangible authority. You know, we so often think of leadership as something totally external, right? Something we project outward into the boardroom or our communities. But what if the strongest leaders out there draw their power from the absolute most intimate, private parts of their lives? We're going to break down this moon in the fourth house placement to uncover exactly how inner emotional grounding creates external leadership. I am so thrilled you're here for this because honestly, it's a perspective that might just completely shift how you view power.
But before we really get into the mechanics of it, I want you to stop and just think about this question for a second. What is the true source of leadership? For decades, traditional corporate culture has kind of taught us that leadership is all about forced authority. It's about being the loudest voice in the room, projecting this total invulnerability, and commanding respect through sheer dominance. But what if that's completely backward? What if true power, the kind of power that actually inspires people and creates lasting stability, doesn't start from the outside in, but from the inside out? Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll be defining the lunar foundation. Second, we'll explore the power of home. Third, we'll look at security before authority. And finally, the intuitive leader.
Starting off with Section 1, defining the lunar foundation and those astrological roots of inner stability.
To really wrap our heads around this, I want you to imagine a person as a massive oak tree. The branches, your career, your public persona, well, they can only grow as high and as strong as the roots are deep. In astrology, the fourth house sits at the very, very bottom of a chart. It is your root system. It represents your emotional security, domestic life, inner peace, and your psychological foundations. It's your totally private world behind closed doors. Literally, it's the sanctuary you retreat to when the world just gets way too loud. The very soil where your psychological roots are planted.
Now, let's bring in the other half of this equation, the moon. Astrologically speaking, the moon is the planet of emotions, instincts, comfort, and nurturing. It's all about how we feel safe. So think about this. What happens when you take the moon, this planet of pure, raw, unfiltered emotion, and the drive for comfort, and you place it squarely inside the fourth house, the absolute arena of ultimate security? You get this massive compounding effect. You get an individual whose entire operating system is deeply, fundamentally wired for emotional grounding and a really strong attachment to familiar environments. So, the crucial point here is this. A person leads best only when they feel secure inside. This is the absolute core thesis of lunar leadership. For someone with this specific placement, their ability to lead isn't just some separate skill they can turn on and off like a light switch. Not at all. Their external leadership is a direct overflow of their internal emotional safety. If the inside is chaotic, the leadership is going to falter. But if the inside is secure, man, the leadership just thrives.
Moving right along to Section 2, the power of home, and how environment actually shapes a leader.
Now that we know inner security is the absolute prerequisite for their leadership, we have to ask, how do they actually get that security? Well, through their immediate environment. Notice how all these factors group together. Home and family aren't just nice-to-haves. They are the central engine of their emotional balance. Mood changes at home directly affect daily productivity. Like, if there's a big argument at the breakfast table, actually any kind of domestic friction really, a lunar leader doesn't just leave it at the door when they swipe into the office. It heavily impacts their daily drive. And conversely, if their home life is disrupted, it immediately and noticeably reduces their focus and leadership drive. Their workplace ambition is physically and psychologically tethered to the peace within their four walls.
And it goes even deeper than just their present-day home. Emotional attachment to the past or their childhood heavily influences their current choices. Take a second to reflect on your own life. Think about how the environment you grew up in and those emotional attachments you formed back then kind of act as a hidden compass guiding your present-day decisions. For the lunar leader, this compass is incredibly strong. They are constantly referencing those foundational roots to navigate all the complexities of their current leadership roles. So it all boils down to this. There is exactly one singular, non-negotiable requirement for this individual to confidently step up and take on responsibility, and that is emotional reassurance and comfort. They don't need a super fancy title, they don't need a massive salary, and they definitely don't need constant public adoration. They just need to know unequivocally that they are emotionally safe. Once they have that one primary thing, the floodgates open.
Which brings us to Section 3, security before authority, the real foundation of clear decisions.
We've established what they need, right? A stable inner foundation and a peaceful home environment. But what actually happens when they get it? Well, this brilliantly illustrates the contrast. When a lunar leader is dealing with a disrupted home life, it literally reduces their focus and leadership drive. The roots are shaken up so the branches just kind of wither. But flip that around to a stable home life, and it supercharges their cognitive function and strategic clarity. Decision-making actually becomes so much clearer in safe, supportive environments.
Their leadership ability doesn't just statically exist, it actively increases with stable emotional security. Inner peace directly improves their authority and their confidence. For a lunar leader, inner peace isn't just some weekend wellness goal, it is the literal fuel for their authority. And wonderfully, their leadership often feels incredibly natural when they're working in fields connected to family, real estate, property, or domestic settings. They lead best when they are quite literally in their element.
Finally, let's look at Section 4, the intuitive leader and reaching emotional maturity.
So, what's the long-term payoff of doing all this hard work to secure that emotional grounding? Well, let's see how this builds. It's a clear three-step progression. Step 1 is achieving that baseline of emotional security. Once that is fully locked in, it naturally evolves into Step 2, decision clarity, totally free from the noise of internal anxiety. And finally, over time, that clarity matures into Step 3, intuitive leadership. They no longer have to overthink every single move. Their leadership just becomes this fluid, natural extension of their stable inner world.
When that inner security is rock solid, decision-making becomes natural, steady, and deeply intuitive. This is the ultimate state of the lunar leader. It's a really effortless kind of leadership. They don't lead by force, and they definitely don't lead by shouting commands. They lead with this quiet, steady gravity. Because they are so thoroughly anchored in their own emotional truth, others just naturally look to them for guidance during turbulent times. Their internal peace becomes an external anchor for literally everyone around them.
I want to leave you with this really powerful concluding thought, straight from the text. True leadership is not forced, but emotionally rooted. This single sentence perfectly cements the core message of this entire explainer. Real power doesn't come from aggressive dominance. It comes from knowing exactly who you are, feeling totally safe in your own skin, and having a genuine sanctuary to return to when the day is done.
So, as we wrap up today's explainer, I want to leave you with a final, provocative question. Look at your own life. Look at the foundations you've built. Are your emotional foundations actually secure enough to lead? Are you tending to those roots, or are you only focused on the branches? Take some time today to look inward at your own psychological foundations, because as we've learned, the peace you cultivate at home might just be the absolute most powerful leadership tool you have. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep exploring.